The Fortress, a short story. Chapter 6 and 7. Fortress. The blackberry mass had the mottled black and green texture of moss and stone, of a fortress wall that had seen centuries of conflict and warfare. The gaps in the vines weren't of the vines themselves, but pits and pockets dug into the stone from cannon shells and arrowheads and musket balls. The wall's leading edge was strung with fringes of pointed barbs and thorns. Only ravens and sparrows dared, feathered furies placed as sentries protecting the sweet berries on the other side. Never mind gold and silver, or the potential dragon snoozing on heaps of crowns, coins, and jewels. The blackberries themselves were far more invigorating to the soul, for being so fleeting in their harvest. The birds were masters behind this wall, as the dragons nesting on their riches. Other animals were tepid as spies and ghosts, evading the temper of the birds and the revenge of the thorns by passing through the undergrowth. The surface between the fruit-bearing weed and the earth was barren as a wasteland. There were few thorns close to this dry earth, but few berries, the older vines taking the shape of thin timber, hard and tough. The fortunate scavenger caught berries that fell to the ground, sometimes rough and weathered, or holed by bugs and sour. The rain was scared of the thorns as well, touching only the leaves and leaving the berries alone. As the birds took refuge, the raindrops fell through the air and gently landed on the leaves to make their way to the vine. The raindrops traveled carefully around each thorn to reach the earth. Quite a few raindrops were barren of common sense, smashing themselves with abandon against the leaves and vines, slashed and gutted by thorns before soaking into the ground. The ground was the ultimate prize, the finish line. No drop reached their prize without damage, either their souls wrecked by fear and compromise, through the pain of their travels, or obliterated by rudely caring not what happened 1 minute before the next. No one leaves this earth unscathed. For the birds and rodents, the vines were necessary shelter from the storms and wind. The thorns were sentinels standing guard for when the tempest grew too rowdy. And as a storm passed, the birds erupted in chattering delight, and the rodents followed on to their routine. Dreams. The blackberries grew into a necessary windbreak for the house when the rainstorm stirred in winter, and a ballast for the road noise coming from the bottom of the hill. Mother and father had a small greenhouse built against the house, from the sliding glass door off the dining room. There were fleeting fragments of memory in Dizzy's mind of that greenhouse, but he could only fathom them from the old photographs in the shoebox in the pantry. The greenhouse was torn down when Dizzy was 3, when his sister was born. Back then, there was a narrow boundary of thin grass between the greenhouse and the wall of blackberries. When the greenhouse was built, the blackberries were hardly a thing. The large pad of terraced earth circling the house lined with brush and a few trees, with an open view of the sky and the surrounding hills. There was a photograph of father, a strong and lean man sporting a slim beard and a youthful smile, sitting on the mini-dozer he used to carve the terraces. Dizzy recognized the figure of the man, but not the spirit. Dizzy understood the difference between the young man and the man who came home on the weekends, but could not fathom the reason. To know the man behind the mask, one had to see under the mask. There were no tools for Dizzy to use to see the man beyond the figure who came and went. Boy, loyal as a dog, he wanted to. The house was a ranch style, comfortable and low to the ground. In the shoebox were a few photographs of when the house was new. One photo was of the hillside, when it had been carved out and leveled long before the house was built. Approximately 16,000 square feet of smooth ground. The oak tree in the backyard was hardly as tall as a grown man. The large plum tree in the front yard was a sapling, almost a weed. In the photographs of the new house, the oak was twice as tall, and the plum tree was blooming with blossoms, showing the long stretch of time between when the ground was leveled and the house was built. There were no offhand ruins of previous settlements, no half-buried foundation of an older house. There was a tin chicken coop on the far side of Mother's garden, dusty and ancient. There was no other indication of older construction. Dizzy planned on building his fortress through the belly of the blackberries, out of scrap wood like the coal mines he had seen in history books. He read a story of how Romans ruined mountains, digging through them with mine shafts and flooding the shafts with water, the mountains washing away. Maybe the story was a legend. Water would make the berry patch grow more, and Father would be outraged at the wasted water. Dizzy leaned piles of wood against the blackberry wall, with tools he swiped from Father's tool shed. He stashed some of the tools under the bigger planks lying in the grass. The plan evolved from strings of different ideas he had previous to his fascination with the blackberry bushes, a fascination born from fear. First, he was going to dig an underground bunker above the upper terraces, just short of the tree line on the hill overlooking the house. All while he dug down, he visualized vaulted ceilings and straight-cut walls, floors of wood plank and smoothed clay, handcrafted furniture invented from his own design. Light would come from car windows laying over dirt holes as skylights. He continued to dig downward, a grand staircase out of the earth, leading to the open terrace spread out alongside the house. From there, he planned to carve into the clay walls ornate pillars and sculptures of lions and dragons. He saw photographs of castles carved out of mountains. He could do the same, in spite of being now only 6. He cut into the hard-packed clay with a dull shovel too big for his thin frame. He dug and carved and pried at the earth, and in the following weeks of effort, all he had was a neat hole perfect for a small coffin. When it rained, he stayed inside, in his bedroom, drafting future plans. Then it was the task of clearing water from the hole. There was no letting the water soak into the hard clay. He tried looking for planks of wood to cover his construction from future flooding, as Father took exception to Dizzy using his prized blue tarps. By midsummer, the hole dried and Dizzy set to his plans. Dizzy took a deep breath and sat on the edge of his hole. The clay was hard and gritty. After scraping the topsoil down, he looked for where he could put the mud piles he made. He had an earlier idea of making a clay hut. The hut grew in his mind as a massive house. The idea fell apart after another hard rain, where he had some short walls formed around a tiny doorway. The clay couldn't dry enough where it didn't wash away or fall on his head. The underground complex took less effort to imagine than to make. After a month, Dizzy grew bored with the work, only managing a grave again filled with water. He put the shovel someplace where Father wouldn't find it, where it would rust and be discovered later by the lawnmower. On to another dream. This video is a little different than the previous 2. Something of an experiment with type, not to be too pedantic with using only video of the drawing process. One can imagine that could get a bit tedious after a while. Sometimes seeing a story is just as well as listening to it, so with use of type, having the draft of the short story available as it's being read out. After these individual parts are completed, I will make a complete video of the entire story. One whole shot. As always, thank you for watching.